is in fact quite heartening for uh, new students or beginners to hear uh, that success can be found very quickly. A lot of people think they have to struggle a long time in meditation before they get any results out of it. But that struggle that they're doing in meditation is merely the same struggle they've been putting in their whole lives already anyway.
Yeah.
So to make that change, some could even go so far as to say that it's merely the difference between changing the lights from on or from off to on position. And we do it with sati. So tell me more.
Um, I think, yeah, the biggest difference has been the attitude that I bring to the meditation. It's more like letting go. So I'm focusing more on letting go of the perceptions that the doer side of myself tries to make, and the thoughts that it brings, and I just see them, and I sort of disassociate with them as soon as I see them, and
Mm-hmm.
I let them go. And especially when I let them go, I focus on being happy that I have seen it. And yeah, as soon as I do that, the line that you said, like, oh, I see you, Mara. That, as soon as I do that, that thought comes in my head, and that just makes me happy.
Yes.
And
Good.
once I come back, there's over time, if I keep on doing it, let's say for 15-20 minutes or something, suddenly the small joy that I had been building, that amps up, and there's a lot of diffused light that's going behind my eyes. uh, Before that, at that point, I used to get really excited, and that would like kill that joy, whatever, because I'm stressing and trying to do something with it. But since the last three sets, I've focused more on staying with the breath, taking deep breaths, in fact. And but if it feels, the only thing that had changed was, if my mind really wants to just not do anything with the breath and just stay with the breath as it is, because it starts getting shallower and a lot more softer, and if that feels a lot more relaxing, I just let that be and don't really focus on having long breaths at that point. Like, after it becomes far more relaxing to just be with the softer breath. And at
Okay.
that point, a lot of tingling sensations start arising all of the body, and there's a like almost an exponential surge in the happiness that I'm feeling. And yeah, at that point, like, there's a lot of trembling and stuff that happens, which has sort of died down now. It's not as shaky as it used to be. And so yeah, I can stay in that whatever states arise for like a few minutes, then this sort of mellow down, and it feels like, yep, it's comfortable and it's just going on. If I can stay there for some time, then um like the emotional side of things amp up rather than just the tingling sensations, and it feels like this yeah, it just feels like it's far more undistracted, and my thoughts have like really mellowed down. Like, I can't even tell if there are thoughts. It's just like something going on in the background, but they don't take my attention away from what's happening right now. Uh, and yeah,
Wow.
so that has happened for like two of the last sets. But the very first set that I had, I in fact got to a state where even that happiness started after like 3 or 4 minutes or maybe 5 minutes. Even that happiness started feeling uh, annoying. Like, it was just 5 minutes of that happiness felt like it was like, I don't know, just annoying. And my mind started to sort of wanting to let that happiness go away, and it's sort of the smile that I had, it sort of went down a bit. And then I was in a state where it like my awareness opens up. So in the beginning, my awareness is mostly just focused on my head. Later, it moves down somewhere around the chest area, and the after that, once I let the smile down a bit, it's more around the lower body, the legs, and it feels like someone has put a very comfortable like blanket or something around me. It feels like I'm sitting in a hot tub. Like it's really comfortable, and I could stay there for like probably forever. But at that time, the sit got over, so it's like okay. And yeah, I haven't. Yeah, till now it's mostly the first surge that I'm dealing with because that's somewhat unstable, and I don't know exactly where to focus. Should I focus on my breath? Should I focus on the pleasant sensations? So if you could just tell me about it.
All right. Well, the, the exact question that you asked, I don't have an exact answer for. But by re-going over some of the points that may give you an idea of how to answer that question for yourself, and that question actually is asked often and gets a different answer from time to time. Okay, so there's no one answer to that. Not even to the point that a student would say, oh, well, because I've been practicing this many months and I'm at this stage, therefore I should be doing this. But that's not true. Everything is going to be happening in the here now. So whatever comes up, that's what we need to deal with. So let's go back on some of the language that you have used. The first thing that I picked up on was when you talked in the early part about the word disassociation. And I would really like to look at that for a moment. Because when the mind is in hindrance or when it is in its natural, normal, non-focused state, then the kinds of thoughts and things that are happening are coming out of our personality, the whole show of it. And the stuff bubbles up from that. But now when you wake up, you say the word disassociation. That's exactly what we're looking for, is for you to literally come out of that or come above it. This is, in fact, in an important way of looking at it, this is lokatara. This is the supramundane because you are no longer in your own world. Now you're above it looking at it. And you use the word disassociation. That's exactly what you did, was that you were associated with, or you were the personality, or you were the thoughts, you were the Mara. And now you're waking up out of that, and you can say, aha, I see you, Mara. That's that disassociation is also the coming out of the self, so that you can begin to see in a kind of a bigger way what is selfish and what is not selfish, because this is an important point that we have to begin to research. It's actually, though it's stated as the first fetter, it ultimately is the higher of the fetters, the highest stuff that we have to deal with, which is right down to the bottom of it is going to be fear and the self-preservation instinct and that kind of stuff that gives rise to all of our selfishness. And so after we get into the habit of being selfish, then it's a remarkable new thing to make that transition out of being selfish into being, let us say, something that's hard to define. And in fact, we need to define it a little bit so that we can at least say that we're where we're going. One of the ways of defining it, or at least giving the term to it, is a higher self or a bigger self, in the sense that we're a part of humanity, or we are a part of our environment. And that this is coming because the self actually tries to separate ourselves from the environment because we see our environment or our other people as somehow dangerous, and we perceive them as danger because we have the feeling of fear. Except that the feeling of fear is not a present feeling of fear, it's an old habit of the feeling of fear. That in fact, in the present moment, as you well know, there's really no danger. In fact, this present moment is quite delightful. So the question is, how can we start working through the sitting meditations and these experiences and the trainings that we're doing so that we can be out of that state of fear most of the day, if not all day long? Which means coming out of the fear is also a way of saying it, coming out of our old bad feelings. In a more Buddhist way, we would say staying out of the woeful states or stop being reborn as in the woeful states, like the state of an animal or a state of a preta. You know the preta, the hungry ghost,
Ah,
right? The ones who are always hungry. Most meditators are pretas.
yeah,
They
lot.
want the experience. They want things. They want enlightenment. They want to remember past lives, and all this desire and want is keeping them out of the state of satisfaction that they need to practice. And the way that we get into that state is by disassociating. And I like that word. That's why I wanted to keep bringing it back. Disassociating with the personality and the thoughts that now we're beginning to label as Myra. That I am not that. That is not who I am. And yet most people are caught right into that. In fact, most of the people who actually understand it, not only at an intellectual level, but from time to time at a really deep level, still they spend most of their day caught in that personality, that they're not disassociated with it. And so this disassociation that you're talking about is an extremely important point in the sense, how can you actually cultivate that? How can you cultivate this disassociation? Now, we can call it disassociation, but we can call it other things too. In fact, this disassociation is nothing but the relief or the freedom from the tragedy of our Mara or our personality or our selfishness, being in self protective mode, right? So, in fact, joyfulness, altruism is another word that we could use, um, and disassociation is the goal that we need to practice to first get into and then to maintain as best we can. And then, if we fall out of it, to get back into that state and maintain it again. And this becomes our real practice. Our real practice is once we figure out what it feels like to become disassociated from our personality, that now we can begin to choose who we are. This whole idea of anatta means I am not the self. The Buddha is actually pointing to this, that I am not the personality that I think I am. The personality that's made up of my perceptions and my past and my way of looking at things and my feelings and my body. All of those five aggregates that I've just mentioned, we put together into form and think that that's our personality. And that's who we are. Except that that's not a static thing. There's no real permanence there. That it, in fact, is in flux, it's in turmoil, and it's also in a state of dissatisfaction. In fact, part of the turmoil is being dissatisfied, that it's not whole or complete. But we can come out of that. One way of thinking about it is that people feel empty inside, as if there was a hole. Now, within the Buddhist context, we'd say, yeah, that's a nice hole. Let's keep it. Let's keep it empty. Let's not throw tricycles and motorbikes and gods and things like that into that hole trying to fill it up. Let's just leave it empty. Um, Another way of thinking about it, though, is that really what's going on is we're lacking connectedness, that we're not really an individual with a hole in the middle of something missing. We're much more like a jigsaw puzzle piece, very, very complex. All of these little things that are on the outside. And that what we need to do is to find a way so that we fit in. And we don't fit in very well, mostly because people are kind of too complicated. They have too many rough edges, etc. Or they won't hold still long enough to fit into place. So a lot of the stability that we're going to gain through our practice of meditation is the stability of, let us say, the unification of the mind so that we can actually fit into our environment. And by fitting in, we become part of a bigger whole. And that bigger whole then has many different names. Some people call it the universe. Some people will call it God. Some people will call it nature. But whatever it is really big and vast compared to the individual little one. And yet we've been spending all of our time on that individual little one trying to protect it because it feels insecure. But once we can come out of that and disassociate with that, then we can find our own shape so that we can fit into our environment in a beautiful, happy way. And now we become much more interested in the welfare of others, that we are overflowing with joy, that we don't have to struggle to find our joy around other people when they're unjoyful. No, when we're around other people, our joy is so great that we just kind of butter them up, or we get their, how to say it, sympathetic vibration. This is, in fact, what mudita is all about. You know, you've heard of metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. This is mudita. Is becoming at such a sympathetic joy of resonance with our environment that we spread joy to other people naturally. This is, in fact, how we begin to fit in. This is what we're actually all longing for, is how do we stop being a tiny individual or associated with that personality so that then we can open to the real environment. Well, that real environment is actually the here now that's through our senses of our eyes, our ears, our tactile, our proprioceptic, and the body is especially important and valuable because it seems to be the one that we put to sleep. I think also the olfactory, that humans don't smell very well. And in fact, when I say they don't smell very well, that means that they don't like the smell of each other. We've kind of closed down our olfactory senses. But if you look at dogs, they live by smell.
Yeah.
I can walk in and out of the house many times, but I can actually walk into the house and open the refrigerator, so sounds and things like that. But if I walk out of that refrigerator back out onto the porch with a piece of cheese that's wrapped still in its wrapper, no cheese available to the air, and yet they know that that's cheese. From the other side of the room or the other side of the porch, and sometimes they're out in the yard and they smell that cheese and they come right up to it because they know I'll give them some, right? How do the dogs have that kind of an odor capability? It's remarkable. The sensory awareness that dogs have that we just don't have the equipment. Well, one thing, their nose is very long. They've got lots of sensors in there, and it's also a lot of nerves that do a lot of the processing of the odors. But we do have a body that's different from the dog in that because of the hair on a dog, the coat that they don't have as many neural sensory places as we do. For instance, a dog can be just fine with a tick. But if you've got a tick, It really is a hurt. You find that dude and you pull him off really quick, but the dogs will just let the ticks be there. They do gnaw on each other and do grooming. I'm not saying that they don't, but I'm saying that the human body is much more sensitive, and yet when we're little kids, the environment is too much for us. Falling down and getting hurt is a tragedy.
Yeah.
And so we tend to stop paying much attention to our senses. There's only a few professions that use a particular part of their body. Dancers, karate, sport people get a body awareness that most people don't take on. Others that use their hands, like mechanics, learn to see with their fingers. Why? Because they've got to put the bolt back into the engine, but they cannot see the bolt and they cannot see the engine, not where we're looking at it. So we've got to learn to feel with our hands so well that we actually are able to see with our hands. So what I'm saying is that the human body is capable of waking up in a way that our olfactory senses can't. We don't have the equipment. We've lost that. But our capability of sensory awareness is much, much better than the dogs. And yet the dogs are very sensitive to their territory. So if anyone comes into the territory, the dogs will be right on it. So one of the games that I play with my dogs is that when someone comes onto their territory, I want to know it before they do it, because I've got a better sensory awareness system than they do. And I've been training mine. So this is an important way of opening up to become part of our environment. Now, you can actually see this in politics. Right now in the United States, you have a whole lot of people who are living in a feeling world. And that feeling world right now is feeling cooped up, isolated, cabin fever. They can't live their lives the way that they could before Corona 19. And that you have another group of people who are saying, wow, boy, I don't have to work right now. I can sit down and I can enjoy my life. And not only that, but because of my wisdom of knowing the danger of the coronavirus, through my wisdom of an understanding of that danger, I'm going to keep myself safe. To where people who are driven by fear, they are driven more by their old fear because they don't have any fear or recognition of fear for this new thing, the coronavirus. It's only after they lose their own mother or someone like themselves actually gets sick that they know, or they're close to someone who really gets sick with it. Only then will they be able to see and feel the danger and then respond to it correctly. All right. But right now, what's happening is that they're responding to it selfishly and holding to their own feelings and thinking that, oh, well, the coronavirus is in that state. That's not my problem. So they have the kind of wrong view that they can get away with it. And that's when they cause danger. They cause the danger because they think that they are immune to it somehow, that it's over there, or that my Jesus is going to take care of me, or I'm a tough dude, or any of that kind of stuff that they have as mentality is what's causing the danger. But the people who see not themselves in danger, but see that it's dangerous to humanity, it's dangerous to our environment, it's dangerous to other people, and that I should, in fact, isolate my own individual mind or body because of the greater good or the benefit of the society itself. Okay. So here we can see now a clear distinction of what is self and what is no self right there in the society itself. It's right quite evident. And then you can begin to see, oh no, it's not just in the coronavirus 19 issues in the United States, but it's everywhere. That we either have an internal way of looking at me, or we have a kind of an outgoing, I'm complete. Let me join with this environment and see what's going on. That's where my compassion is going to come from. That is really hard to have compassion for people who we don't identify with. And the people we don't identify with are the people that we can't see. We don't know them. And so, but when we take a more altruistic view, when we literally disassociate from our little self, that's when we can actually be of benefit to our environment. That we can be happy. We can be uplifting. We can actually spread the Dhamma,
But
spread joy.
how would you, like, after you've dissociated and you're feeling altruistic, how would you deal with someone who, let's say, related to coronavirus, feels like it's just a hoax and they want to leave the house, whatever, and they want to go back to normal lives? I feel like at that point, if I dissociate with the self and I don't even feel like protecting that person or my family or whatever, and I say this because it's someone in my family who's probably acting like that. And if I don't bring in that feeling of, hey, that's my family member, I want to make sure that they live a happy life and they don't get this disease. Uh, like, how do you deal with that? Like, do you let it be and let them do what they want, or do you try to stop them, which I feel like brings in a form of craving in me, and that feels like dukkha because I'm trying to like change their viewpoint, and it's very hard to do that without getting some craving in.
Okay, you can do it actually by direct, or you can do it through concepts. Most people try to do it through concepts or talking somebody out of it, or saying even that you're making it dangerous at home. Okay, but if you're in let us say constant, I wouldn't use the word contact because we're about to get to that. But if you're in constantly in the vicinity of a person like that, then it's really easy to start to train them.
How would that work?
All right, this is the way that you do it. You already know that social distancing is a major aspect. We also know that wearing a mask is really important. So what you can do is, first off, whenever you've got a mask and whenever that guy comes around, you put your mask on immediately. And anytime he starts to come close to you within 4 to 6 feet, you say, no, stay away from me. But you do so very joyfully. Not that it's anything that he's done wrong, but oh no, you just stay away. This is a time for isolation. Everybody stay away. And you practicing it loudly and openly in front of him, he may want to argue with you about it. But
Yeah.
don't argue with him. You can say, you can go do what you want to do. You stay away from me. You stay away from everybody in my family. If you want to go out, you go out. You stay out. And this is the way, so you can socially distance from him that way to start teaching him a lesson. The lesson is that you care and that he needs to. You need to start looking and he needs to start looking.
But if they don't, and so at that point, are you letting it be? Like, what?
No, if he comes close to you, you step away. You stay out of the room he's in. You
No,
let him know that you're staying away from him because he's not practicing correctly. You're saying everybody else in the family is, only one guy is like this.
yeah, but that person leaves the house and then would come back. Uh, so the sympathy comes from the fact that I know that that person might have to deal with a lot of dukkha in case something happens to them. So, like, you can't really stop someone from going out without them learning a lesson directly, right?
Here's what they do in Thailand. The police are out on the street, or at least they were in the beginning. Now it's not so much of an issue. The police were out on the street with masks, and they frequently stopped people, not to give them a ticket, not to charge them money, but to give them a mask and have them put it on right then and there. If you've got a cop that gives you a mask and he told you to put it on right now, that's what in fact has gotten the Thai society doing it. In fact, the thing that's kind of funny is it's the Westerners who are not, that I see here in Thailand, that are not practicing correctly. They don't wear the mask. They collect together, even at the hospital, where all of the Thai people are keeping their social distance. They're wearing the mask. Everyone's doing things correctly. So with this idea of the cops giving him a mask, every time you see him leave the house, you can give him a mask and say, "Hey, put this on." That we need to educate our people. This is an important thing. He might argue with you and not put it on the first time, but the next time he'll wear it, and he might wear it for 5 minutes and then take it off. But the third time that you tell him, he'll wear it for half an hour or an hour or so. This is how it is. It takes a training, even to do the social distancing. So this is the way that I would suggest handling that for you. Now that we're bringing that up, is for you to be joyful about it, but that you're making a stand with him in the sense that you don't want him anywhere near you because he's been out there and he's not practicing correctly. And every time he goes out, you give him a mask. Maybe every time he comes back in, you say, "Where's your mask? Put it on. We don't want you out here coughing around us now that you've been out there." Okay, so you can make it kind of real for him that he's going to have to make a choice as to that he can go out. We're not telling him he can't go out, but that he's going to have to behave correctly when he goes out, which is what you want. You want him to be safe. It's not that he's going out that's unsafe. The fact that when he's going out, he's not keeping his distance and he's not wearing a mask. But if he's both wearing a mask and keeping distance, then he'll probably be all right.
And the other case where you are keeping distance with people, right? And you're stepping away from them. Isn't that coming from a form of self-clinging? Like if you are,
Well, it could be if, in fact, you were stepping away from him out of your own fear. Here, you're stepping away from him out of altruism and compassion for him. So, is that selfish? Well, maybe, but it's still beneficial and wholesome. But if you're afraid of him, if you're angry, if you're upset about his behavior because he's going out, then you will in fact act towards him in your own selfish style, which is not going to do anything but kick in his own selfish style. But if you behave in an altruistic, open, concerned, compassionate way, and give him a mask every time he goes out, then and to playfully say, "Stay away from me. I don't want you come breathing on me. You've been out there." You can begin to play with him and begin to open his awareness, because now he understands that you're doing it out of compassion for him, not out of fear. So that's a really good, important point, right? Because you're not associating with your own feelings, that you've disassociated from them, and now you're looking at the greater good of the family. So congratulations for that. That's exactly how we want to do it, that we want to stop being individually selfish and be more altruistic, more opening up. And that that lesson is really, really hard to learn until we begin to understand that we are not our personality. We are not our thought systems and our feelings. We are not our Mara. That we become disassociated from that stuff.
Now, one problem that I see during meditation, especially, and once I get up from the sit, is I've started to dissociate with even the intentions, the doer that even directs the attention, right? So I feel like there's levels to how much dissociation is fine during meditation as well. Because if I start dissociating with even the mover of awareness, the doer that directs, hey, the attention should be on the breath or something, and if I even dissociate from that, uh, I don't know how to meditate. Then at that point it becomes sort of open awareness. So then it's sort of switching between gears, between being totally dissociated and between sometimes stepping in and directing the attention, which feels fake. I know that's me just like sort of being associating with the doer itself, and in that case me also seems weird. But yeah, how do you sort of switch between these gears during meditation?
Well, that switching is already automatic. You're asking me how to say it. Yeah, it should be really, really obvious that you don't need to learn how to do something that's already happening automatically. It's already switching. Your job is to become more alert and aware to what's going on, to pay close attention. Another way that we talk about it, in fact, the primary word that would be used would be guarding the mind. And so you can see that association, disassociation moving back and forth. And once you get into that state of feeling really good, really satisfied, the object now should be to maintain that state. That getting into it often and maintaining it for long is the process that we go through. Those would be two different kinds of skills to be developed. But that second way, the maintaining of the state of satisfaction, even in the sutras, they talk about it as a sense of sustained. A sustained kind of thought means that you're keeping the kind of thought that's keeping you in the state of Sukkha. So that's a skill to be developed, of bringing it on and then maintaining it, which means that now we're going to start guarding the kind of thoughts that we allow to have. We start watching the mind because we want to make sure that we're not going to allow any thoughts to come in that are going to pull us out of the state of satisfaction. The kind of thoughts that will then reassociate us with personality, or we can fall back into believing or experiencing that we are the thought, or that we are the feeling. That I feel bad, I feel angry, I feel afraid. No, anger is just anger. It's just a feeling. You are not that feeling. Love is the same way. In the kind of selfish love that people have, romantic love, the kind of love that's very common, is the love of I want something. I'm in love.
Yeah.
I love her. That kind of egotistical, if you will, or selfish kind of love that's actually built into desire of I like it, therefore I want it. But here we're practicing actually something I haven't mentioned yet, and that is being able to like something without wanting it. That we don't have to become hungry for it just because it looks delicious. That you can go through a restaurant and pass by tables and smell different smells, or maybe you can smell the cooking that mom is doing, and you like the smell. But if you're not hungry, you're not hungry. You
Yeah.
don't want it. You can like it. It smells like, but no thanks. Don't want it. I just had a meal. Or we can like it and then want it. So that's the question. We do that also with girls. In fact, girls want to look good because they want to be wanted. That's their security. That's where women get their security, as men get their security from women. Women get their security from men. Except that everybody's disappointed because nobody can give any security to anybody. But we can find it within our own mind. We can find that security, and the way we do it is by disassociating with that which is insecure. And we see that insecurity, or we see that whichever it is that is keeping us, let us say that it's about now to drag us out of our Sukkha. Now, the word Sukkha is an important word. It's an association with the first jhana. It's also the opposite of dukkha. It's also directly a skill to be developed sitting there in the Anapanasati Sutta. Develop Sukha. How do we develop that? Well, that development of Sukha means that we're constantly practicing to come out of or disassociating ourselves with the dissatisfaction. And when we become disassociated from that dissatisfaction, satisfaction naturally arises. It just naturally occurs.
Yeah,
In fact, the way, go ahead. All right. So the way that the sutta is actually phrased is the piti and sukha that is born by seclusion. So being secluded from this personality, being secluded from these thoughts and feelings, being secluded from Mara is satisfaction on its own. That's quite successful. It's quite marvelous to be able to disassociate and to come out of it.
It feels like a relief. Yep, done. Yeah.
To become free. So now that we like this state of being free from all of that stuff, we need to learn to maintain it. How do we do that? Is by learning to guard the mind. And how do we guard the mind? We do it in stages as we develop skills. One of the early stages that can be seen would be in the sense of a particular issue or topic that's to be avoided. An example of that is the old man has been going to this temple for many, many years. He's very much associated with all the details and the finances, and he's one of the major donors and all of that kind of stuff. And then a new monk comes and he gets into an argument with that new monk. All right. So now he goes home and he has enough Dhamma to say, I'm not going to think about that monk. Furthermore, right now, I'm not even going to think about the what. The very place that I spend most of my life, I'm just going to disassociate myself from that because I know right now, anytime I think of the what, I will think about that monk. And if I think about that monk, I'll start to feel bad about the argument we had. All right, so we're beginning to say, okay, there are certain areas or boundaries whereby we're no longer going to allow the mind to go. If we take that in a more general sense, we can say, well, all right, we're going to make a major boundary in there and say we're only going to allow the mind to have wholesome, good, altruistic thoughts that are disassociated with the personality, and mostly thoughts about what's happening right now in this present moment, as opposed to not allowing in any kind of thought that's going to pull us out of our state of satisfaction. What kind of thoughts are these? Thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, thoughts about old feelings, the very kinds of things that we have in our personality. So if we just let the mind ramble and run around, it might be pleasant for a short time, but we're going to wind up stubbing our toe. We're going to wind up running across an old memory that is painful. So the best thing to do is to throw that stuff out. As soon as we recognize that that's what's happening, we throw that back out before it robs us of our Sukkha that we've just spent time developing. So we don't give it much time. You come in, you let out you go. I'm good to go. I don't need you. Okay. Because if it comes in and stays, then we'll associate with it and we'll lose that state of joy, that state of satisfaction, that state of Sukkha. But if we keep practicing over and over again, no, I'm going to start deciding what kind of thoughts I'm going to allow myself to have. That's a major, major milestone in one's practice. So that we can understand that no matter what kind of thoughts come in or whatever the situation is that's there, I can still come back and put myself into a state of satisfaction. This is what the Buddha calls the first knowledge, or the first step on the path. The very first knowledge that actually this knowledge is noble, it is super mundane, it's a factor of the path, and it is not held by ordinary people. Most ordinary people, your friend that you're talking about, he doesn't have the ability. Just say, never mind, throw that stuff out. I'm good. I can come back to Sukkha. But how we get that is by practicing Sukkha over and over and over again so that we know that, hey, this is good, and no matter what happens, I can get the mind into this state of Sukkha, which is dukkha free. All right, now let me give you some examples of that. But can you be happy and joyful in the police station? Can you be happy and joyful in the police station while you're in handcuffs, being dragged to a cell?
Yeah.
All right, okay, here's that. All right, good. When I tell that story, very few people say, yes, I can. Most of them will say, well, maybe someday I'll get to the point that I can handle anything.
Now
All
that's
right.
the point of the path, right? Like I've seen that happiness comes from the inside. So if I've trained the mind to not have those feelings of I'm going to jail and it sucks and so on, and if I can remove those hindrances, joy sort of seems like a natural state that builds up contentment and so on, right? So yeah,
Uh-huh. And then you can be friendly with the cops. You can make friends out of them.
yeah,
When you get into the station and they're giving you to the desk sergeant, you can tell the desk sergeant, "Hey, guy, these officers here have treated me really well. I really like them. I'd like to give them a citation for good conduct." And, how many keep people getting arrested say that kind of stuff to the desk sergeant?
yeah.
No, nobody wants to be there. It's a really tense, bad situation. There is no happiness in the police station. But just because you're in the police station doesn't mean that the police station mind has to enter your mind. When you know that for sure, that's what the Buddha calls that the first knowledge. That it doesn't matter what happens, I'll be okay.
Yep.
Doesn't matter what happens, I can handle that. Even if it kills me, I can handle getting killed. And so that's that first knowledge. And that is born from that state of seclusion that arises this sukha, this state of satisfaction. So once you get into that state of satisfaction, you're now going to start promising yourself that you're not going to let the mind get into the state that it was in when it's in personality, or when it's in protective mode, or when it's feeling dangerous, or and all of the feelings that are associated with the instinctual way of behaving. That in fact we're now behaving through wisdom. We're being human about it rather than being an animal being drug in. So this is a way of looking at it. How can we then maintain that state of Sukkha is by guarding the mind to make sure that nothing comes in to disturb it. And if it gets disturbed, not let it stay disturbed for long. And that's when sati comes back in. All we got to remember, come out of that. Become disassociated from that. Feel good instead. That's your choice. In fact, the feeling good is almost a natural outcome that is born from the seclusion of the hindrances. So throwing Mara out, and now we've got space, we've got comfort. And we also have the attitude of a winner. We become lion. The Buddha was known to be a lion. He was strong. He was powerful. He was not a sheep. He was not a lamb of God. He was a lion. This is the way that we look at it, okay, is that you're going to be very successful. So going back, in fact, to that police station business and getting arrested and feeling good while all of that is happening, that takes a strength of mind. That takes a real winner, someone who knows that he can handle anything. And so that strength of mind comes from right attitude, which is a factor of the path. So that we develop the right attitude that I can handle anything. And so by being able to handle anything, that means that I have already developed that skill of guarding the mind to keep stuff out that's going to pull me out of the state that I choose to be in.
So the state that you're talking about, is that the first jhana or is that pre-jhana stuff?
I've mostly been talking secretly and using code words with my language and self, talking about the first jhana.
So
satisfaction and the feeling of championship or the feeling of a lion, this is piti. It's right attitude. So yes, we're talking, and also applying the mind and sustaining it. That applied and sustained thought, that's a factor of first jhana. So yes, in the past 30 minutes or more, I've been dancing around first jhana without mentioning the word.
I but so I've heard that you don't get any hindrances in the first jhana, otherwise it's not a jhana.
Pardon?
That you don't get any of the 5 hindrances if you're in the first jhana.
Right.
But seems like there's still thinking going on, even if it's about the present moment. And once in a minute or so, it is possible to suddenly get a craving or something, even though you can disassociate with that very quickly, almost instantly. But is that still considered a jhana, even if you're getting
right, because you're in that sustaining, you're in the developing and sustaining mode. There is a sutta that says, and is talking only about the first jhana. I know because I did a literature research, and that this sutta that's talking about this is referring only to the first jhana, with no other suttas talking about the second, third, and fourth jhana in this way. Okay, and I'll explain why in a moment.
Yep.
This sutta says that we develop the skill of getting into first jhana. Okay, that's what we've already been working on, is developing the skill of getting into that first jhana, which means getting the mind into a state of disassociation with the personality and being free from the hindrances and experiencing the joy, the sukha, the pleasure of being free from all of our crap. Okay, so we develop getting into it, and then we develop and become skilled at sustaining that first jhana. So in a way, you could say, yeah, you dropped out of first jhana just an instant, long enough to have that thought. But then later you're going to have another thought, and it'll drag you out for a longer period of time, and then you've lost that first jhana. But can you get yourself right back into it? So we get ourselves easily into first jhana, and then we can easily maintain first jhana. And to now the third point, which is quite a clicker, and that is to develop the skill to properly leave first jhana. What does that mean? Normally, people have the skill of leaving first jhana by going back into hindrance. You just fall, That's what skill is that? Oh no, let's look at this. The developing of the skill of leaving first jhana is there's only one place to go, and that is into second jhana. And so, in the normal progress, the way that jhanas are normally practiced, the question would be is when someone falls out of jhana, where do they land? They land back in hindrances. What we want to do, though, is develop the skills so that when we leave second jhana, that's the back entrance into first jhana, so that we have a safety net. So even if we're in the higher jhanas, most higher jhana dudes, when they come out of jhana, they crash land into hindrance. The right place to land is in the safety net of first jhana. And so we need to develop that skill of getting back into that first jhana immediately. If we come out of the fourth jhana and we crash land into hindrance with a thought, maybe a mosquito bite or somebody hits us on the head with a baseball bat or something, a lot of things will pull people out of fourth jhana. But the question is, are you going to get angry and say, I've been silent for 20 years now. How dare you come and fall on me? That's a movie scene out of Life of Brian. You don't know that movie. Okay, so that's the whole point is that if you fall out of fourth jhana, are you going to fall back into hindrance? Or are you going to be able to come to the point that you can fall out of fourth jhana, maybe bounce, but you're back into the safety net and you can stay in first jhana? This is the path to enlightenment that the Buddha refers to when he's talking about the story of being under the rose apple tree. Why am I afraid of the pleasures of first jhana? He asks himself. And then he says, I'm not afraid of the pleasures of first jhana because that's merely the state of satisfaction. Because you see, he had been first this teacher and that teacher practicing jhanas and all of that, and then later he practiced austerities, which nearly killed him. But now he's coming to the middle path. This is something a lot of people don't understand about the middle path, but we can think of it like this. The middle path is actually the first jhana. Why? Because going all the way down into hindrances is nothing but a kind of self-torture, flagellating ourselves mentally. And the other extreme is looking for the pleasure of the higher jhanas is basically the same people as looking for pleasures in the brothel or looking for pleasures in the wine. They're out there looking for something, okay? And so this is why they develop the jhanas the way that they do. But the jhanas themselves are not liberating. They're just nice, pleasant states to be in. But that first jhana, that's the one that is liberating because we can conceptualize, we can think, we can put together, we can guard the mind, and there's other things to do. Now, leaving the first jhana and entering into second jhana is also a skill, and this is how we do that. And I'm telling you this so that you can play with it if you want to, but it's a frame of reference. Remember that we talked about beginning to change the content of the mind so that now we're only going to allow wholesome thoughts and to not allow unwholesome thoughts, to where the second jhana is known to be in a state where there are no thoughts. Now, most people say, well, how can anyone go into first jhana or into second jhana into the state of no thought from a state of let us say a beginning first jhana, that's still quite a mess. It's really kind of jumbly in there, and we're going to find a way of settling that down. How do we do that? Is by, with the guarding of the mind, we systematically close it down. So first you could think of it is that we're going to put a one fence between the pasture and the desert. And then later we're going to put another fence in so that we're going to start putting a boundary around it. One of the ways that we can put a boundary around it is by allowing the mind to only think about certain things. An example would be only allow the mind to think about what's happening right now. This is what the Mahasi people call noting. But we're noting what's happening right now, but we're not noting in the frame of reference of being in hindrance. Now we're noting in the frame of reference of being in jhana. All right, so that noting means that now we're only going to allow the mind to have thoughts that are within a particular little box, the box of the body, for instance, or the box of the senses. There's a further box to bring down, and that would be, say, a verse, a poem, or a song that's said over and over again, but it's fairly complicated, maybe 2 lines. Another part of this would be like counting. And there's several different ways of counting. One would be every second or so you would count a number to indicate your breath, so that you would breathe. A way of looking at it is 8 breaths, to count 8 on the in breath, to count 8 on the out breath, and then count 4 between the out breath and the next in breath. That counting then is counting basically up to 20. And at 20 seconds, that means that our breathing is all, even though it's deep breathing, we're already down to 3 breaths a minute. Most people breathe at 20. By beginning to breathe, deep breathe, you cannot breathe at 20 breaths a minute and deep breathe, but you certainly can continue deep breathing while you're down to 3 breaths a minute. So this is also focusing the mind on just the counting and just the watching of the breath. Another one would be having a short phrase, a little song to sing. One of them that I know that monks use is actually a chant that's used for in funerals, and that is Anicca Vata Sankara Upatawa Yudamino Upajatawa Nerujante Tesa Vipassano Sukkha. And we just say that over and over and over and over again. Another one, which is slightly longer, would be Iti Piso Bhagawa Araha Samma Sambuto Nicha Charana Sambano Upato Lo Gabedu, etc., like that. So just that one little phrase over and over and over again, and that's all we let the mind do. That's all we let the mind think about. In fact, doing that kind of chanting in the evening chant at the Wat gets the mind so focused that in the next time when they're starting to meditate after they finish chanting, the dudes can pop right in. Okay, why? Because they've already gotten the mind very, very focused in a tight little circle about this chanting, and they're keeping track of it. Then the next one would be, the next layer down would be really closing the mind down to having only 1 or 2 things, such as a mantra. In northern Thailand, they use the mantra Bu-Do. Bu on the in breath, Do on the out breath. In India, Om Namah Shivaya, okay, or Om to the name of Shiva. I am Shiva. All right, so that keeps the mind, especially like Bu-Do. If your only thought is left is Bu on the in breath and Do on the out breath, then that period of time after the out breath is finished, before the in breath, the mind is empty. That will take one right. The Bu-Do takes people right into second jhana if they're practicing it working well.
So you
But
just need
that second jhana only lasted for 4 seconds, but it was second jhana for 4 seconds. And then we bring it back again to the point of, okay, so on the next in breath is going to be a Bu, and then on the out breath, Do. And we've gotten the mind down to just 2 syllables. Bu, Do. That's where it's a whole lot easier now to remove 2 words out of the mind than it is to get the mind completely empty when in fact it was quite crowded. So this is how we enter the second jhana, and the way then that we would practice leaving second jhana would be on that next in breath, would be go back into Buddho or go back into that high first jhana state. But normally what happens is when the student finds out that his mind is quiet, he gets excited. Yippee, I did it, I did it. And when he does that, he's right out of jhana again. Okay, so now we need to practice getting back in jhana. So I thought that I would mention this to you about the skill of getting into first jhana, the skill of maintaining the first jhana, and then later the skill of coming out of first jhana is actually the development of second jhana. What that indicates then is that we, as a skilled practitioner, we spend much of our time in first jhana and very, very little time in hindrance, which means we spend much of our time in altruism and thoughts of good and thoughts wholesome, and very few thoughts of selfishness or not liking or thoughts of personality.
So, when do you know that you're in first jhana? Is it the first part of Sukha that arrives, or is it when you have Sukha, Piti, and sort of an amping up of lights and everything?
I would say that the answer to that has to do with the distinction between the fruit of the first jhana and the path of the first jhana. That the first part that you're talking about is path, of how we get ourselves into a state of sukha. So that's the path of first jhana. But that sukha then gets really nice. And that's the fruit of the first jhana. Is
And
when it go ahead.
how light of how light should a jhana be, or how deep should it be? Because the jhanas that I'm getting into right now are lighter compared to what I've done before, which is a method taught by Aya Khema and
All right, here's the answer to that. Rather than going in that direction, it's better for you to practice maintaining that light place.
so it has to be pretty light, right? I'm just saying that that's the expectation that we are going with. Like
Right.
the pity isn't so super strong that I'm just moving all about. It's a nice tingling sensation, but it's
We're,
not super strong.
we're looking for a state of mind that can be practiced well enough that we can get into it, and that becomes our new frame of reference rather than the personality as our frame of reference. Okay? These higher states of jhana are not practical for living. They're practical as and can only be done in seclusion. An example of that is you can't drive a car when you're in the higher jhanas. Please, I would rather you be arrested and in jail happily than out on the road in high jhana, because you'll kill somebody. You're not watching where you're going. You're watching too much on the inside. So the higher jhanas don't really have that much value to them, and yet what the the attraction to them is simply because they're higher numbers.
No, I'm
I
talking
mean,
about the depth. Depth as in those two jhanas can be the same, the first jhana, but one can be so deep that you don't even know about your breath and all you know is piti, and the other jhana is where you know about the breath, but you also have piti and everything going around. So the depth is different. Uh,
right, but you can't really live your life like that.
so we are
For
still
it,
going for
for
a
instance,
lighter.
for instance, you don't want to you don't want to go into a state of mindlessness and live your life that way, because that means you're not going to be talking to anybody. If you were in the state of second jhana, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would
So the
be
jhanas.
enjoying what you're doing so much that you wouldn't be paying attention to what I had to say. We can't live our lives in those jhanas. So it doesn't give us much value but there is. When I say not much, there is in fact value in the jhanas, but the value of the jhanas are better once you become really skilled at first jhana. But most students say, "Oh, I've got first jhana, I want second. I got second, I want third. I got third, I want fourth." And there they go. That's just greed.
Greed of jhanas. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Greed for experience, greed for numbers, and greed for bragging rights.
Yeah. It's a lot of bragging.
And it can become a lot of baggage. And in that regard, there are detriments to the higher jhanas. Later, we'll get into what the value of it is, but we have to actually talk quite a lot about paticca samuppada. But the introduction of that is the dissociation. Become disassociated from who you are. The more disassociated from who you are, personality-wise, is basically backing up through paticca samuppada. From the end of it is dukkha, back into feelings, salayatana, down into perception. And is in fourth jhana and places is when you can really see how the perception system operates. This is what they mean by perception and no perception. What they mean by boundless consciousness, as opposed to consciousness that's bound by perception. It's not infinite consciousness, it's just unbound from perception.
Isn't that the fifth jhana?
No, there are no fifth jhanas.
No, the arupa. I don't know if it's called a jhana. The formless attainment or something. I guess.
Yes, there's many different concepts or language about it, but most of what's been written and talked about with those states are from people who are doing translations of other people's work and have not actually had those kinds of experiences. Especially if they think they're wonderful, if they think that's the goal, you got to go do this. This is great stuff. Generally, no, that's not what the Buddha teaches. In fact, you could say the Buddha went there, he did that, and he figured out that that was not the goal. He also went in the opposite direction. He went into austerities and how bad could he hurt himself and could he starve himself better than anybody else. And he found out that also was not the path. There's this middle path in there. And that middle path is, in fact, the first jhana, so that we're not in the hindrances or the austerities of harming ourselves. No, nor are we in states that pull us. You see, when we're in hindrance, we're in the head and we're doing this. When we're in the higher jhanas, we've shut our senses down also. But the first jhana is where we really have the sensory experience wide open. That's when we can really experience what the reality is.
And once the path, you call it the path of the first jhana, as the sukha starts arising, where do you continue to focus on? Are you continuing to focus on the breath, or do you start also focusing on the sukha and enjoying it?
All right, the answer to that is guarding the mind. Make sure that, so your object now is to sustain the sukha.
So not even focusing on the breath per se, you're still mostly on getting rid of the hindrances and keeping them away.
No, you can use the breath, and in fact, we recommend that in the sense of looking at it like this. There comes a point on the in breath where it's a long in breath, and that you know that it's a long in breath. Also, you know that it's a long out breath. These are two actual points of sati, little sati, not the big wake up, wakey, wakey. You know, you're in personality, you're in a sleep. But yet, when we're in the first jhana, then we continue to come back to the breath, but we don't stay on the breath. We've got lots of time, but we do kind of check in. It's sort of like coming out of prison, but now we go on parole. Okay, we got to keep checking in with the police over and over again. The police keep wanting to know how's our behavior, how's our doing. This is actually the training of the first jhana, is to keep checking in with the breath. And we check in on it twice each breath. once on the in breath and once on the out breath. Is this a good deep in breath? Is this a good deep out breath? Is all of the sati that we need, all the in focus or attention, and the rest of the time can be brought back to maintaining what the sukha is by maintaining what the mind is doing. So therefore we're going to stay in that state of sukha by only allowing the thoughts that are going to be wholesome, that are going to help sustain us, which has to do with the present moment. So one of the things, for instance, that we can pay attention to in all of this is watch the body. Watch the body just sitting there. This is what Mahasi means by rising, falling, touching, sitting. The rising is the rising of the abdomen, the rising of the in-breath, the falling of the out-breath. Now, when people are breathing really shallow, there's not a lot of rising or falling. But when you're taking deep breaths, there is rising and falling. So we begin to watch and notice that. The touching then is the sensations of touch of the body all over that. And then the sitting is referring to the proprioceptic system, that you know your posture.
Yeah.
Whether you're laying down or standing up or sitting in a chair or whatever it is, you know where every part of your body is. You know where your feet are without having to look at them. How do we know that? It's because of this internal sense of the body that many people actually help confuse themselves as that's who I am. That's the me. No, it's just a proprioceptic system of gaining data, input data. And so paying a close attention to what the body's doing, waking it up. This is one of the things that we can do. Also checking what we feel in the sense of the sensations of the body that are associated with emotions. When people get angry, their body does things. So as we're practicing doing this in sitting, we're actually getting ready to practice this out in the world, because it's unlikely for you to get yourself into a state of anger while you're sitting in meditation. It can happen. But out in the world, it can happen really instantly. But now we need to start becoming aware of what is the body doing. Because, in fact, not necessarily anger, but people will often find anxiety, tensions. The hindrances are known that way to be in two tiers. One tier is what's happening in this present moment exactly, and then the other tier is the underlying what you could call underlying tendencies, or the deeply buried stuff, the deep fetters, or the source of all of this. And at the bottom of it is fear. But fear expresses itself as anxiety. And so people, in fact, can be in meditation or sitting on the floor thinking they're meditating. And in fact, anxiety comes up. They can either stay in that state of anxiety or they can become aware of it. If they become aware of it, now we can work with it. And okay, let's deal with anxiety from the state of sukha, where we can actually look at it. Now I'm not afraid of the anxiety. Yeah, the anxiety is there, but my state of sukha is there. And that's the state that I'm working from. I am not the anxiety. I can see the anxiety. I can examine it. I can breathe into it. I can use the breath to begin to manipulate the anxiety, the feelings of anxiety, which are nothing more than sensations of the body. They can be in the chest. You can have sadness that's normally felt deep in the belly, a sort of bottom dropping out of everything. And so these actual feelings or sensations are what we call Vedana, and is part of the investigation that we do. But this stuff is normally quite deep, that we need to get rid of, or let us say work with the shallow part first, which is the thoughts. So, and later we begin to make that same boundary. And in fact, we've actually started doing that already. The same boundary of I'm going to only allow wholesome thoughts and not allow unwholesome thoughts. Now I'm only going to allow wholesome feelings and not allow unwholesome feelings. Now we're really getting someplace. So anxiety would be a feeling that we're not going to allow ourselves. We're going to play with it. We're going to manipulate it. We're going to play with fear. We're going to get down to the bottom of it, take a look at it, and always breathing with it. Normally that stuff will just pass right out of the body within 4 or 5 breaths. There's no reason to sit in a state of anxiety. We can breathe out, breathe it out, and get rid of it. So this is the way that we begin. So when you ask, well, what do I pay attention to? The answer is anything that'll keep you out of the state of Sukkha, or if you're in the state of Sukkha, anything that could drag you out of the state of Sukkha, that's worth paying attention to.
And are you also paying attention to the Sukha?
Yes. In fact, that's your bottom line. That's the floor you're sitting on, or that's the perch you're on. Don't fall off of that perch. Keep track of that. Maintain it. Sustain it.
But is the sustaining in sort of waves? Like, does the first jhana feel like waves of the amplitude of Sukha or Piti?
It can.
Does that mean you're losing the first jhana, or does it mean that it's sort of maturing into contentment, or just Sukha?
You can think of it sort of like, rather than direct current, you can think of it as alternating current, or maybe a wave.
Yeah.
But a wave has a trough and a crest. Things like that. Things are moving. Nothing is going to be static. There's going to be movement within everything. So, judging the crest and the trough and saying, oh, the crest of the wave is better than the trough of the wave is ridiculous, because you cannot have a crest of a wave unless you've got a trough of a wave. That's just the nature of waves. So don't judge one over another, but rather see it as the process. And the task that we're talking about doing is to being able to maintain that state of Sukkha.
So that's still the first jhana, even if there's if it mellows down a bit for, let's say, 5 or 10 seconds and then comes back up. Those 5 or 10 seconds was still first jhana?
Yeah, sure. Watch that. First jhana is a whole range of things. It's not just one thing. But it does have factors to it. But those factors are not fixed. Those factors, for instance, the hindrances tend to come back.
Yeah.
But then when we see them, we throw them back out. And you're asking the question is, when that hindrance came up, was I out of first jhana? Well, that's kind of an irrelevant question. The real question is, did you see that when it came up, and can you throw it right back out? That's the right kind of question.
Just checking if I accidentally went into, let's say, the second jhana or something. In that state, it felt like things got more stable. There was still a lot of happiness. In fact, probably a bit more of happiness compared to previous one.
When the mind gets quiet, there's nothing left to pay any attention to at all other than feelings.
But the point that I was coming to is, it didn't get quiet in terms of that nothing was happening, just that it was happening further away, almost in the background, like quiet whispers. Not like it's completely gone, but just that those thoughts didn't take my attention at all. Like, I had no idea what the
then
thought.
I would say that may be a very pleasurable state, but that's not the definition of second jhana.
So you have nothing going on, even
that background stuff. In fact, that background stuff is the very dangerous stuff that's going to start getting louder and louder, that'll pull you out of first jhana. So even that background noise that you have, you want those to be wholesome thoughts. In fact, that's a way of looking at it, is that once you're actually in the first jhana, that the thoughts are going to be there, Now we're going to start controlling them. We can say that they're in the background, but we're still going to control them in the sense of only allowing wholesome thoughts.
But I
So
can't.
you started paying attention to it, right? Start looking at those background thoughts.
But that's the issue. I can't even notice the content of those thoughts. They seem like pre-thoughts, like the stuff that happens before it forms some content that you can pay attention to. Like
Bits
it's
and
just
pieces of thought, then, is what you're saying.
like mental activity, but you don't know what that activity is per se.
All right. Then now, so you just gave yourself the task of start paying attention to that stuff. Start looking at it, see what it is. That it may be so soft that you're only hearing part of the thought, but if you start paying attention to it, you'll see more of it. And the job then is to make sure that those kind of thoughts are wholesome thoughts.
And what about the state where it felt like I went into a hot bathtub, or like someone put a blanket of kittens or something on me? Like, does that?
That just is part of the Sukkha. That's just merely part of it. Feeling protected by that blanket, feeling warm, feeling wrapped up, feeling complete,
Yep.
feeling whole, feeling secure. That's part of the Sukkha.
So those are still jhana, right? It's not me getting.
Generally, that's first jhana we're talking about still.
But what happens if I come out of the jhana? Would I still continue? Let's say I accidentally come out of it. How do I tell that has happened? Do I still have some remaining piti and sukha? So I might
You
accidentally.
might. That's something for you to investigate.
Yeah, because
You
once I
might.
get up, I still feel like there is some piti going on in my body for the first few seconds after I get up from the sit as well. So it's pretty hard to tell if it's.
Well, getting up doesn't mean that you automatically leave jhana. In fact, one of the things that you can start to practice is while you're in that great state of sukha, can you open your eyes? In that state of sukha, can you start moving the body? In that state of sukha, can you actually stand up? In that state of sukha, can you turn around and walk out of the room?
So you'll still be in the first jhana?
First jhana is the place to stay. You can talk, you can enjoy. What is the first jhana's hallmark? Being free from the personality, being free from selfishness, being in a state of freedom from the hindrances. That's the hallmark. And the other hallmark is that you can think the thoughts you want to think.
So you technically can do walking meditation and get this first jhana as well.
I would say technically you can actually do walking meditation in second jhana, but not the higher jhanas.
And then what's the point of jhana? Because I come from a noting background, and noting leads to a cessation. But how does jhana lead to, let's say, stream entry or whatever? Like, how does it lead to awakening?
That's a good question that'll take us a couple of hours to answer.
Oh,
However, I will go to the point of saying that the first step of Sotapan, the first knowledge is the knowledge that no matter how obstructed the mind gets, I can clean it out and come back to this present moment. That's the first step of Sotapan. That's a kind of a hint as to how all of that stuff fits together. That in fact that knowledge is that we can clean the mind out is actually a knowledge of the practice of first jhana. But when the jhana gets really good, then that would be the second insight, is when the mind can get really stable so that we can really see the Dhamma. But I'll talk about all of this stuff later. But the first step is, do you think that you can clean your mind out and come to a state of sukha, no matter what?
yeah. And final question, seems like sometimes one of the sits, I did get into the same state, but once I got out of it and ended my sit, it felt like I had subtle dullness. Uh, Not really sleepy, but still felt like it wasn't as sharp as normally is.
That's when the tiredness or the sleepiness is a strong indication you need breathing, to take a few breaths. If you've been squatting on the floor and had a good homeostasis and all that, and you get up, now you're all of a sudden you need more air. If you continue breathing the way that you were breathing, you're going to get tired, and you can see it. You can feel that mentally. And so always bringing back the long, deep breath is an important quality.
But I wasn't in this dullness during the jhana, right? Because that's a hallmark of a jhana, that you
Right.
can't be in a hindrance while you're in it.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
But when you get up, now the body needs air.
Yep. Cool.
Kind of makes sense, after we start praying. Yeah, all of this stuff really makes sense. It fits exactly in with the experience generally.
Yeah, it fits pretty close to how it actually, like, I can't even believe that something that was written like 2600 years ago is so real. Like, the Buddha seems like a genius,
Me too. I'm really impressed with the Buddha. He was some dude.
like a super genius or something. Yeah.
Well, no, he wasn't super genius in the sense that he probably could not even take an IQ test of today. He'd probably come up looking like a moron.
Yeah. I think there's a story about him being really young and inventing his own counting system to count the number of sand particles or something similar to what Archimedes did 300 years.
I have not heard those, but I know there's a lot of magical stories.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's a
that
lot,
just mythology was.
right? There's a lot of magical stories, but the part that is not magical is that he figured out how to come out of mental suffering, how to come out of the standard human condition, and that's marvelous.
Also, seems like the jhanas reduce the cravings in day-to-day life as well. Cause it feels like I don't need to depend on the outer world for happiness. So I don't need to be greedy at all.
That's part of the teaching.
Yeah,
But when I say teaching, I'm not talking about it in the sense of you heard it in a lecture, but the teaching that you're teaching yourself. That if you can get yourself into a state of Sukkha, that goes really deep into the mind. So an example would be you pass by a store up front, and it's got an item in there, and the old self would really like that item. You want to buy it. But the new mind, because you've got your own satisfaction, you walk by that same store, you see that same item, you like it, but now you don't want it
yeah,
because you've already gotten something to supplant what you think that item is going to give you, that you're already satisfied now. And so basically our shopping tendencies really start to change once we get satisfied.
and I don't know if so. I didn't mean to do any of this discernment kind of thing while in the first jhana, but I guess my mind inclined to it and did it on its own. I know there's no
These
doer
are natural
per se.
states.
So I know I don't control the doer per se. It does its own thing. That becomes really clear in the jhana as well. But it sort of started focusing on the non-constant state of this first jhana, how it especially moves in waves, and like the amount of stress that goes into maintaining the first jhana. And after that, yesterday it felt uh, like there was definitely insight into how our mind or this doer tries to maintain the perceptions. Even if it's happiness, it's still trying to maintain it. There's a lot of slight stress involved even in that. Is that starting to get into the Vipassana side of things in this first jhana experience?
Yes, any kinds of insights that we have, but a lot of the insight is at a deeper level, almost a kinesthetic level. The insights that we get from, say, being in a state of Sukkha may not be an aha or a verbalization. It may be more of a sigh, or like finally, or relaxed, or whatever. That's the kind of an insight also. So when we're thinking about insight, we're talking about just a basic learning. So learning how to feel good is kind of an insight into how to feel good. And a lot of things that are really important and profound don't seem to be in the moment that we have it, where other insights will really, really hit us. That someone will say something or put something into context, and then we go, got it. Finally, I understand. Okay, big one. And that this happens on a regular basis for people. My friend Robert just mentioned that. He said, last year you kept going on and on and on about a particular thing. And then recently he calls to say, I just read something with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and he said the same thing that you did, but this time it clicked. So some of our insights, we have to hear them over and over and over again, and then finally it clicks. Of course. And not only that, but the way that the teacher said it, or the way that it was written in the book, is exactly the right way to say it. I just wasn't getting it.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is one of the reasons why I'm very happy to repeat what I have to say over and over and over again to students, because I know that they're just like I was, that sometimes I need to hear something 30 times before it finally clicks. So this is the nature of insight. Sometimes it clicks and hits us hard because it's already come in so many times. And then other times things sleep in very subtly.
They slowly change your behavior over time. Like,
Yes,
pinpoint.
it does. It seeps in. An example of that is people don't get as angry as they used to, especially if they begin to watch for anger. If someone is prone to anger, then he's going to say, okay, I'm going to be on guard for anger. And then when he gets on guard for anger, guess what? He's going to start coming out of anger.
That works. Cool. Yep, I'll try these techniques as well. So I'll probably try and maintain the first jhana for, like, I don't know, a few minutes.
Don't get too hung up on the label, the first jhana.
Yeah.
That even though I talk about it, I can also, like I did before in the first part of it, talk to all around it without ever using the word. True. Because we somehow or another, we've gotten a magical idea about, oh, this is jhana, this is for, no, it's just a normal state.
Yeah. Like, so the insight that I was telling about, that's actually this, that even the first jhana doesn't feel as good as it used to, in terms of, I can see there's some stress involved in maintaining it, and my mind doesn't even want to deal with, like, making all of these perceptions up. They feel sort of fake. They feel like it's just me doing stuff. Same with normal life as well. It's just my perceptions making it.
All right, let's look at it from the sense of going to school. In school, we have grades. We have A, B, C, D's, F's, that kind of thing. But in graduate school, many classes are done pass fail. All right. You either fail at it, which means you're in hindrance, or you're successful at it, which means you're in Sukkha. You're either in Sukkha or in Dukkha. The Buddha doesn't have digressions of dukkha. That's something that ordinary people put in there. So the Buddhist system is much more of a pass-fail. And here you're talking about various digressions and whatnot of satisfaction. No, satisfaction is satisfaction. When people say they're very satisfied, that's just the same thing as saying that they're satisfied. So don't look for, is it getting better? The question is it good enough right now? And just maintaining this is good. This is good enough. So far, so good. I like this. Steady as she goes. This is the kind of new mentality that we have. This is good enough. I don't have to get it best. Just get it good.
Cool.
Excellent. So go practice on getting it right in the sense of just a joy. Keep bringing that back. Keep developing that so you get into a state of satisfaction and you can maintain that satisfaction and not let it pull you out of that state of satisfaction.
Yep, I'll practice maintaining it more so just getting it. So
excellent. All right. Well, we'll catch you later.
Yep, cool.
See you next time.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.